So, okay, lovely. So, yeah, Happy New Year before we start. I'll get that out. Well, I hope everybody's well. Coming back into a practice like this after a gap, and I was just talking about, you know, the unstructured nature of that period through Christmas and New Year. I do quite literally forget sometimes which days. Is it Wednesday or is it Tuesday or Thursday sort of thing? So it's not just a purely physical thing. We want to ease our way back into that without too much feeling the pressure that it must happen now. So starting in the classic way with Tai Chi, with an awareness of posture, feet below your hips, so hip width apart, not too wide or too narrow, toes pointing forward as much as possible. Weight a little bit forwards and hips just settling back, and the feeling of sinking into our body, into our hips. Aware that there is a support there, the ground supports us, but our legs support our upper body, our back supports the front of our upper body. Our skeleton and that inner area of the body supports the outer area. But even if you've done this before, or you've been practicing, you might find it's a little bit distant at the moment. That's fine. It'll come back. And I'm going to start with the exercise I normally finish with. We will do it at the end. Just rubbing your hands together. So this sort of self-massage tapping exercise can be a really good way of bringing your attention into your body. Starting on your face, just aware of the sensation as you tap your face. Maybe slightly stinging, but hopefully not unpleasant. Up over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Your arm. And keep a nice steady rhythm as you do this. The other side. Punch your back with one hand or with both hands. And around your hips. Your legs. Light on your belly. And onto the upper part of your chest. Me. So what I'm trying to do is to just draw our attention into our body. And this can be a torturous process if we get sort of too frantic about it. Everybody loses that focus of attention. The question is, can we recognize that and just sort of herd sheet the thoughts back into to our body? The great thing about Tai Chi from that point of view is that there was a direct physical change when we lose that focus of attention. But as we become more familiar with the patterns and the movements, we can begin to recognize straight away. I sometimes say to people that in sitting meditation, which is also part of my practice, I'm not criticizing it. You can sort of fall asleep and not notice. But if you're doing Tai Chi, if you're doing the standing Tai Chi in particular, that focus of attention drifts too far away, you fall over. So you've got direct feedback with that. So in the stance, your feet hip width apart and just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. This is a pivoting from our ankles. feeling the weight move into the front half of your feet more, and then more towards your heel. Soften your knees as much as possible. Aware of the pull of gravity down through your hips, and feeling how your body responds to that change. If I were to get this pole, in theory, and I'm not going to even try it because it's a bit uneven and stuff, but if I could set up the perfect conditions, I could put the pole there, walk away from it, perfectly in line with the pull of gravity, and it would just stay there. It's obviously a theoretical thing, but you can see how it's possible. But if I had it like that and I walked away from it, it would instantly fall over. So what we want to try and do is to find this sense of alignment with the pull of gravity, to recognize the signs that we're close to that or that we're further from it. You might think of walking, riding the bike, driving the car. We rarely move in a completely straight line for any space of time. But we don't, I don't get on my bike and think, well, I've got to go a little bit to the right now, I've got to go a little bit to the left. It's quite instinctive, quite intuitive. And so this is an exercise that helps to build up that same kind of intuitive awareness and responsiveness to the pull of gravity working through our body. And that would extend out, of course. If you were doing this outside and the wind was blowing, that would also be a force that was acting. But presumably, if you're inside, an ideal environment to work in, that gives us a chance just to look at the basic principles. So again, going back to the pole there, if I wanted to find that space, I might go, oh, no, it's there, and then go over a bit, and then there. I could perhaps gradually get closer to it. I'm going to stop this in a moment because I'm clearly not getting closer to it. But you get the idea. So we begin to recognize where we have that alignment in the body, and specifically where we find the pressure of our weight. And generally speaking, I think it can be a very personal thing, and there's variations, but it's when our weight is more forwards towards the front of the body, and in combination with that, when our hips begin to sink back and down, that we find that sense of equilibrium. The forwards pattern is quite good, but what we want to do now is let's see if we can come to rest. And if you are slightly forward, you're still angling slightly forward, and this is an encouragement to let our hips sink back a little. All this is very exaggerated, by the way, as I show it. I want to, so I'm there. I'm being pulled forward by gravity. I could strain in my shoulders, my back, my neck, whatever, to resist that, or I can let gravity draw my hips down, and I get that sense of settling, softening the knees, and so on and so forth. And if you are just a little bit forwards, one of the characteristics of this stance, I always feel, is that with relatively little effort, I could just move my weight forwards a little bit and I would take a step forward. So I have almost enough energy to take a step. So it's not a passive posture in that. But we're not going to go forward anymore. So now just letting your hips sink back a little bit more and pushing up. Notice what's happening in your legs, particularly your knees. You don't want to be going to a point where there's a constant sharp pain in your knees. You will feel it hopefully in the muscles of your thighs and elsewhere in your legs, but not in the joints. If I go down, I get to here. I can go a little bit further, and it's like suddenly there's a tightening. So I try not to go quite that far, especially after a break. We've all had a break. We've all been doing other things, in Tai Chi all day. And gradually feeling that our legs develop this sort of springy quality. Effectively, you're trying to drop your weight and then bounce back off the ground. And this is the process that we call rooting down in Tai Chi. So this is important. Rooting down is the first key physical principle. We learn to be aware of our bodies, to use that awareness to help with the alignment of the pull of gravity, and then we learn to drop our center of gravity. The lower your center of gravity, the more stable you are. The lower your center of gravity, the more likely you are to release tightness and stiffness, particularly in your upper body. And the dropping of your center of gravity is the basic process that's yielding to the pull of gravity that gives you the energy to expand upwards again. So, first basic principle, first physical principle in Tai Chi is to root down. Movement is rooted in the feet. The second, as we'll see in many different ways, that if you like, the energy that comes from that root is transmitted through the legs. And as you push up, to see if you can feel here in the lower part of your back, just above the pelvis, this slight sense of pressure pushing you up like a wave coming up through the body, pushing up through your back, through your spine, expanding out through the rest of your upper body. And then as you sink down this time, bringing your hands around as though you're cradling the ball, pushing up that expansion, pushing your elbows outwards. Turn your hands, like there's a ball underneath your arms. Drop your hips, so that if you're in water, for instance, you'll be pushing the ball down into the water. So the movement from soles of your feet to the crown of your head to the tips of your fingers. See which parts of your body are actually responding to the movement, which parts aren't, where there may be areas of tightness and stiffness. You might find that a slight change in how you're doing the movement will release some of that tightness. You might just find that it takes a while for it to happen. Might require a bit more than both of those at times. But as we get more familiar with Tai Chi, and as we work in this area where our minds and our bodies overlap, and we learn to focus our attention, and through that our intention. The part of that intention is to soften, to release, to let go. And as we become familiar with those sensations with the practice, we're more likely to be able to simply use our intention to soften, tighten the back, the intention to release. This is a very natural thing for most human beings. Even people who say that they're sort of very stuck in their heads, actually, it will be very difficult to do anything without some kind of connection, responsiveness between mind and body. There may be people out there who have none, but I think it would be very rare, and that's a quality that we cultivate in Tai Chi and Qigong. So this exercise is simply called rooting down. We bring the variations about in various ways, a memory of the set of exercises that we're doing, which we mostly do regular sets in these arts, with the names and the images associated with the movement. So this time, just a simple change to the exercise, the wild goose. Turn your hands out, pushing up through your legs. Let me just center myself on the screen and down. So if the image of the bird in flight is at all meaningful to you, then that can have an impact on the movements. You might want to think of your arms as being like bird's feathers being waved up and down in the air. expanding, contracting, is the regular rhythm that runs through all of these practices. You may find that your breathing is just naturally following that pattern. If it isn't, then you may choose to try and adjust it sometimes, but for the moment, especially again, after the break and a little bit out of practice, a little bit out of sync, best to just let your breathing work in the most comfortable way. And then parting the clouds, hands crossed in front of your belly again, expanding. And expanding. And you can just get a sense of the brush of the air against your fingertips as they move through it very gently. This time, just let your arms hang down. Come back into the posture if you've slipped out of it, which is quite likely. Remember, weight forward. The ideal is to have, come closer, the weight, I would say 70% of your weight in the front half of your feet. Another way of thinking of it is that the focal point is on the border, or just behind the border of the foot, on the midline of the body. And that slight sense of being pulled forwards, neutralized by your hips sinking back. And then this time, just be aware of the feeling of your arms hanging down from your shoulders. Feel the weight of your arms. And if I come a bit closer, notice slight slope in my arms. I think there's probably more so on this side than on that side. There's always a difference. Recognize that we quite often stand like this, but this is actually much more natural. It might not feel comfortable if those muscles there are tight, but in time it will do. And just try and keep a sense of that. And again, start to sink your weight down. And as you come up this time, use the movement upwards to push one arm up. Just dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Rotate your arm and pull down. On the other side, push up and pull down. Just alternating from side to side while I make a slight adjustment. Nice and gently, nice and smoothly. Feeling the extension all the way through the body here. I sometimes imagine with this exercise that I've got a big elastic band and I'm standing on it. And as I push up, I'm using that push up to extend the elastic band, trying to feel the extension right through the side of my body. And then with the downward movement, I want that to happen quite slowly. I don't want just to snap back. As much as possible, keeping that feeling of your shoulders dropping down. Yeah, well, of course, there's obviously going to be some upward movement, but trying to start the movement with the movement pushing up from the ground rather than this. So the movement builds again like a wave moving through your body. Notice any difference between one side of your body and another? There often is a difference. So that process of observation, of noting what's going on, is the necessary prelude to change. You can't change something if you're not aware of what's happening. And after a while, you also add to that this sense of, you know, how it feels like as you become more experienced in this. Sometimes you might find yourself doing some of these exercises and it doesn't feel right, but you kind of have an intuitive sense of where you're going. One more time on each side. The hand come all the way down, try not to rush. Bring your hands to your sides, and then slightly around in front. And this time the expansion pushes your hands up just a little above your head. And if you look from the side, slightly in front. We often have a temptation to do this, to lean back to pull our hands back. And then let your hands come back down, and they're going to come all the way down to the sides. And then repeat that, but as your hands reach about level with the lower part of your ribs, drop your elbows and push out to the side. So you palm out, and again, notice my hands are slightly in front, not pulled back like this. So your back remains the sort of broader, longer part of your upper body, alternating between the two now, nice and smoothly expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting. Notice whether, and this is very common, I think, we rush the contracting stage. This time of year, there's always an urge to get back into things. You know, the phrase "New Year, New You," and there's always sort of like, you know, start with your New Year's resolutions, change everything, and it's very easy to get pulled into that and to overlook the significance of the inward movements, contracting aspects. In Tai Chi, both are of equal importance. The expansion will be considered yang, contraction yin, and they're not separate from each other. They're two parts of the same whole. And ideally, they're two equal and harmonious parts of the same whole. This time, you push out, and as you push out, just turn a little bit in your hips and maybe your waist as well. And then back. So you're not pulling your arms around, your hands push out in exactly the same way, and then you turn your whole body, and that changes the direction of your arms. So this introduces another physical factor, if anything could be defined as being purely physical, which you can't really, but the focus of your attention is in that area that your hands are returning to between hips and waist. And when we turn there, which is for most of us is a very straightforward movement, that changes where our hands go. Rooted in the feet, transmitted through the legs, directed through the center of the body. So now, putting those four movements together, beginning with the upward movement. So this illustrates what I was just saying, I think, about the significance of the center part of the body. Turning, doesn't matter which way you turn. Because we turn there, and this area is sometimes described as being like the hub of a wheel. This is the point that we return to. The point that we move out from and come back to, that we direct the movement. A bit like, imagine, it doesn't happen in the same way now, I don't think, but old style telephone would go into the local telephone exchange, and the messages would come out from that, and so on and so forth. And we begin to learn and recognize that drawing of our attention, really just for a few moments, not a long-term thing, also has this potential for this feeling of stillness, quietness, from which we can make the observations I was talking about. So we don't want to rush through this. It's very easy to find ourselves, we can get to here, and then we come down, and then before we're halfway down, we're already moving out from there. But just trying to gently follow each stage of the movement. Do one more round. Bringing your hands back, letting them drop down, and with the next feeling of expansion from one side, pushing your arm out, let it just swing up again slightly in front of your body, straight down in front of your nose, down the center line of your body, with your arms hanging again. And then once again, trying to just pull your fingers back a little bit. Imagine being under the arch of one of these old church doors with the stone arches, and you're just pushing your arm out and letting it slide around the arch. I find it's quite a strong movement on the shoulder, and if you do too, be careful with the next stage. You don't have to do this. when you get to here, again, turn a little bit and back. And the idea isn't to pull your arm across your body. It stays more or less on the center line, but sometimes it feels as though the turn itself generates a bit of sideways movement, and that's fine, but nothing is forced. But change sides. Again, notice any difference between one side of your body and another. And then if it's comfortable for you, you add the turn. One more time. And stand. Shake. So those last two exercises really emphasize the significance of this area, the center of the body between hips and waist. An area sometimes referred to in Tai Chi as the lower Dantian. Dantian would just mean field of energy or something similar. And it becomes an increasingly important focus for us. It's the point, as I implied there, where we bring our attention back to for that little glimpse of stillness. It's the physical part of the body that when we do this movement that we did earlier, that dropping of your hips drops towards the ground. It's the part of the body that gives shape to the arms, gives direction to the arms. We've just been doing that in a horizontal sense. Phrase used in some of the old writings about Tai Chi is quite interesting. It says that our minds, and we might think of our head as the seat of the mind. Our minds are like the commander of an army, and the commander would sit back a little bit and try and get an overview of what was going on. The center of the body is like the banner of the army, and there will be communication and instructions and information going between the commander and the banner. So in a sense, you could say the center leads these movements. So it becomes a very important point of focus. The next two exercises, and please be careful with them, especially again after the break, also use the center part of the body, and mostly on a vertical scale. So if I go back to the original exercise and bring my weight forwards, and you can see again I'm exaggerating, I'm angling forward, my shoulders, I'm being pulled forwards. Push myself back. I don't want to do that. I don't want to strain in the upper part of my body. If I let my hips drop back, let gravity pull my hips back, there's a slight rotation in my pelvis. And you can see how that rotation will bring my head upright. The next couple of movements take that a little bit further, that basic idea. So we come to the upright position, not by straining in our back, not by straining in our shoulders, but by allowing the hips to drop. It's the leverage principle. Again, if I come to the pole here, it's not a very long lever, so it's not necessarily a very efficient system. But if I had a weight at the end of the pole there, you can't really see the end, and I wanted to lift it, or think of a seesaw. You've got a child at one end, you would push down on the opposite end of the seesaw to bring the child up. You wouldn't go down there and kind of try and heave them up from above. So when mostly what we do in Tai Chi is use a vertical stance, but when we do angle over, and after all, in our lives we often do that. You might reach over to get something from the table, to wash up, to pick something up from the floor. There's all sorts of times when we do that. The way that we look to bring ourselves upright isn't by straining here, following the principle of lifting using the legs rather than our back. You just allow your hips to drop back and come up in this very characteristic open quality. But be careful with your knees, be careful with your back. So go back to this movement, sinking down and pushing up. Pelvis can be thought of as being level, like a bowl of water. You don't want to spill the bowl of water. But this time, deliberately push the hips back. Feel what happens with your head and shoulders when you do that. And then don't try and pull yourself up, but rather let your hips drop down and feel how that draws your head up. And then push up. The 3 stages. 1, going down, hips going back. 2, simply letting the pull of gravity draw your hips back. And 3, pushing up. 1, 2, and then your arms following, pushing up. They get swung forwards, and we come back to the upright position. Push up start all over again. This is a movement called rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Now I'm doing this quite big, so hopefully you can see some of the mechanics of what I'm doing. But just as always, be aware of your back, be aware of your shoulders, and in particular, be aware of your knees, and just go as far as you're comfortable going. It isn't necessarily the case that the bigger the movement, the better in Tai Chi. In fact, sometimes quite the opposite. You place a higher value on small movements. This time, when you come up, bring your hands to this position in front of your hips, combining the horizontal and the vertical. You turn horizontally, then you push your hips back, that extends your arms through, turn, come back to the center and up. It's called polishing the table. So by moving in your hips and your center, what you're doing is providing the basis for the circular movement of your arm. One more in each direction. And again, just come back to standing. The standing position is sometimes referred to as the Wu Qi stance. In Chinese sort of philosophy and mythology, Wu Qi is symbolized by the empty circle. And then the empty circle splits into two, and we get what's referred to as the Tai Chi circle, what we often think of as the Yin Yang circle. So Wu Qi is the prelude to Tai Chi. And just shake it. So the movement is rooted in the feet, transmitted through the legs, directed, shaped, controlled, however you think of it, with the center of the body, and expressed in the arms. And this is a process that is recognized and repeated in every movement that we do in one way or another in Tai Chi. So qualities of being centered, of being grounded, are just integral to Tai Chi, and this is I think where many of the benefits come from. So we're going to change the stance from this hip width stance, and we look for the hip width stance to give adequate support to our shoulders and by extension to our hips. This is really important. The feet are too close together. You can do this. It's quite challenging. It can be quite good to do this, but it's a bit like trying to balance on the tightrope. You can use a wider stance. We do this sometimes in Tai Chi, but that can be a bit wobbly forwards and backwards. Again, it's quite challenging. So the place where we ideally we work with these basic principles is in this Wu Qi stance. But we're going to change that. You maintain the width of your step, turn one foot out. Just be aware you can play about with this angle a little bit, and step straight forwards with your other foot. The toes of the foot in front pointing directly forwards. Let your hips drop, and now just begin to let your weight move from front to back. So as I go into my back leg, again, there's this sense of, this is very, very exaggerated, sense of dropping down, of my leg being compressed. And again, I get bounced out of that. But rather than going up, my intention is to take that forwards. And then the same thing in my back leg as well. So by yielding, as we would describe it, to the pull of gravity, we start the energetic process that enables us to transfer our weight and everything that that implies. We take this into walking, moving, and so on and so forth. So this brings us back to that first principle of rooting down, of aligning ourselves with the pull of gravity, finding a way to allow gravity to work on our body without straining, without conflict. If we get into a fight with the pull of gravity, sooner or later we're going to lose. If we can align ourselves and work with the pull of gravity, if we feel the flow of the movement that comes out of that, movement is much more sustainable. To begin with, we're just interested in the quality of the movement. The legs fill up with the weight and empty of the weight. But as we get more familiar with this, we're looking for more precision. When we go back, we want 70% of our weight in the leg, the foot. When we go forwards, we want 60% there. And the body remains upright. In everyday walking, that one part of the mechanism of that is to angle forwards so that your center of gravity goes forwards, and we take a step forward. We should chase the center of gravity in that sense, but that's not what we're doing here. And the other thing to bear in mind with this is that the movement starts on the ground. Well, I had a pile of books in front of me, and I decided I wanted them out of the way, and I went to move them. If I pushed on top of the pile would just collapse. If I push from the bottom of the pile, it would slide along the floor more easily. So it makes sense to really cultivate this sense of moving from the ground, even for everyday walking, where there would be a certain amount of tilting forwards. Take that too far, and everything's going to collapse. Soften your knees, soften your hips. To allow the passage of movement downwards. You will find it works the muscles of your legs, but eventually, with time, practice, they'll condition so that it's less of a burden for them, and they too can soften. And then go into your back foot and just raise your front toes gently. More of your weight will settle back. Now you can have the front foot turned out a little bit. Go forwards, sink into the front foot, push your back knee forwards so the heel comes up. And then down. So now we begin to get a little bit more weight going into each leg progressively. Both these movements, the raising of your heel and your toes, are encouraged by your hips dropping. So once again, it's the downward movement that initiates everything. What we don't want to do is, for instance, I don't want to get here and think, well, I'm going to raise my heel, because now my shoulders are going forwards. And because what we want to do next is, with the maximum amount of weight in this leg, we bring the empty foot in, push it out. If it's forwards, you put the heel down, you lower the toes. If it's the back foot, it'll be the opposite. The ball of the foot goes down and then the heel. And as you get more experience, it's not just the foot going down. We call this planting the foot. The foot rests on the ground, and then you just gently press in. So, you know, if you're planting out some plants in your garden, you wouldn't ram them down in. You'd position them, get them in, and then you might just press gently. It's that kind of thing, so that we just feel a fuller contact with the ground. It's quite tricky. If you've been out of practice, you might find there's a few wobbles and things like that, because it is quite difficult. But you'll find that this is an exercise that really has an impact on your everyday mobility and stability. Aware of the pull of gravity, particularly on your hips, drawing you down, keeping you rooted. Shake out. So try that on the other side. Transferring your weight. Weight transfer these days recognized in Western medicine as a key element of mobility. So this is a good exercise to practice generally, making sure that you're not stiffening up in your ankles, your knees, your hips. And actually, if you do have a bit of problem with those joints, that's not at all unusual. Go very easily, but recognize that the movement itself has a healing quality. In Chinese medicine, it has this theory of the energy, and they refer to in Chinese medicine the qi, flowing around the body. And any kind of problem with our well-being has an association with a disruption in that flow, an imbalance in that flow. Not necessarily cause and effect, but the relationship is there. So a key aim in Chinese medicine is always to restore the flow. So for instance, if your knee is giving you some pain, maybe reduce the amount of movement that you're moving the weight so that you can keep the knee soft, be aware of the space in the knee joint. It will work the muscles of your legs, but that's a good thing because that also helps to protect the knee. And you'll find that more and more you're able to move the weight, to move around just generally in your life without the pressure being on your knee, because your knee allows for the flow of movement downwards. It's not going to cure everything, but it does make moving much more easy. Or it could be your ankle, your hip. It's an idea that we would apply to any part of the body in touch. You need to raise toes and heels. In order to do that with, say, the knee, the muscles associated with the knee, particularly the quadriceps, have to be in good order. They have to tone. So that makes an exercise like, if you do have problems with say your knees or your hips, and it is very common to do that, this is a really important exercise to practice. When I first started doing Tai Chi, I was having problems with tendons in my knees. I'd done some cycling. And I found almost straight away that this exercise was a really useful one to restore some quality of positive movement in my knees. Stepping in. You don't want to lean. This is a contraction and expansion of your leg. You keep your body upright. If I do this, then I'm going to fall again. So I don't want to do this. I keep that feeling of my pelvis being level, my hips dropping down. It's just a simple drawing in of my foot, leg, and a push out. Planting the foot. And this time, bringing your foot in, step through, either forwards or backwards. Take a few steps in that direction. And then change direction. And bring your feet. Give your legs a shake. So we're going to develop movements into the upper body from those. Have your right foot forwards. Mirror my movements. Start with your hands at your sides. Push forwards and let that movement come up through your back and begin to swing your arms. If we were doing this quickly, we would feel the momentum. But it's more difficult to feel that, but You can be aware of the connections, that the flow of the movement, the flow of the energy moves through. Connecting your feet with your fingers. This is called fisherman cast the net. And again, the movement is rooted in our feet, transmitted through our legs, controlled through the center of the body, and expressed in our arms. So if we want to change what our arms are doing, the change will come here in the center. So this time, as you go back, turn in the direction of the back foot. And this time, nothing else has changed for the moment. Just letting the arms come across rather than straight forwards or backwards. One simple change. Your arms are doing the same thing. And notice that they curve downwards and upwards as they swing through. So this time, just let them swing up a little bit more. Wait until they get to shoulder height, go forwards, turn, and let the hands drop down. Turn a little bit out, let the hands come up and back. So we have this figure of 8 movement, very smooth movement in shoulders and back. Really all the work has been done by your legs in the center. And it's that which gives a very characteristic sense of flow in the movement. We don't aim to create that. We cultivate conditions in which the flow comes through naturally, just as you would cultivate a garden to allow the flowers to flow. Bring your feet back. Change over. So now have your left foot forwards. Again, mirror line movements. Start with your weight in the back leg. Fisherman cast the net. I always think of throwing a sheet over a bed, actually. I don't get to throw many nets around. But the thing is, the bed's over there, not up there. So I'm not trying to do this. I'm going forward, I'm pulling my arms through and letting the movement move. It's a very soft movement in shoulders and arms. This time as you go back, add in the turn. As you go through, feeling the expansion up through your body into the figure of 8. This time, when you go back, just take the opportunity to turn the front foot out just a little bit, go forwards, and as you turn, raise your back heel. Or you could do this in the opposite direction, depending on where the movement is. Bring your foot in as you raise your arms, step, and go forwards. So we combine the upper body movements with the movement in our legs. Giving us a more dynamic movement, rooted in the feet, transmitted through the legs, directed through the center of the body, expressed in our arms and our hands. I'm going to change direction now, otherwise I'm going to bump into the computer desk. And then bring your feet out. And shake out. Excellent. Good. So once again, rubbing your hands together and tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Come to one shoulder, your arm. The other side. Push your back. This can, at the end, this can help to take some of the tightness out of the muscles that inevitably develops, I think, around your hips. Your legs. Nice and light on your belly. Onto the upper part of your chest. Shake. The last move, embrace tiger, return to the mountain, brings us back to this Wu Chi stance and the quality, the environment that in Tai Chi we refer to as central equilibrium. And the image is the mountain, this sense of stillness, of strength, of openness, of spaciousness, and whatever qualities you associate. So let your hips drop down in the way that we've done before. Push up a little bit like the wild goose, but this time at the top of the movement, bring your arms around. Then you're going to hold a ball against your chest. Let your elbows drop, hips already sinking down. So gravity pulls you back down to central equilibrium. And then start all over again. Just feel the natural cycle of movement, where we certainly move out of that, but by being aware of the actions of gravity, the responses of our body and mind, we just, if you like, touch base on a regular basis. The means to do that is just there for us. We don't have to do anything extra. One more time. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining in.